So okay, now I come to the colonial period. The British emerged victorious over the Portuguese and the Dutch and all the other Europeans. They all battled among themselves, and finally the British were victorious. They spread their tentacles to different parts of the world, and of course in India they were very successful. At first, the British did not bother with the education of natives and focused on playing politics with different rulers. So you see, even in Africa, they didn't try to, they were not interested in education or anything like that. But then they realized the need, because now here they found they could not control India. India was a place where they wanted to get a lot of wealth from. So they needed to rule them, they needed to govern them. And that's why they set up this college, Mohammedan College and Sanskrit College in Calcutta and Banaras, so that they could get a regular supply of Hindu and Muslim law officers so that they could govern them. And the interesting thing is that there were two camps formed, the Anglicists and the Orientalists. The Anglicists wanted everything to be taught in English. They said, let's teach them, let's translate our, there's no need to translate, let's just use our English books to teach them. Whereas the Orientalists said that let's translate our English works into different languages. First, let's make them like us, and then slowly we will bring them into our fold. That was the attitude of the Orientalists. So why did the British impose English on India? First reason was convenience. It started out with that, because they didn't want to learn all the Indian languages, and they couldn't understand Indian languages. So it was very convenient to have English-speaking menials, English-speaking people. So they said, let's set up English educational centers. But the most important reason was that the sepoys would become disloyal. Now they needed an army as well. So they had an Indian army, and they realized that if the sepoys started learning in their own languages, there's going to be trouble. Because the Muslims would realize that these people are all infidels and we should not be having any business with them. If they kept studying the Islamic literature in their own language, then they would not be loyal to the British. The same thing with the people who studied Sanskrit, because then they would regard them as mlechas and unclean people who don't have dharma, adharmic people. So the British realized the danger of letting the education continue in the regional languages. And then with the elite, they realized that if you make them study in English, then familiarly acquainted with the English literature, the Indian would speak of great Englishmen with the same enthusiasm as the British themselves. By the way, these are not my theories. This is all written down by Macaulay's brother-in-law, Trevelyan. He also played a big role in the educational policy. So he wrote all this. He said, familiarly acquainted with English literature, the Indian would speak of the great Englishmen with the same enthusiasm as the British themselves. They would reject the teachings of Brahmin priests. The natives shall not rise against us because we shall stoop to raise them. It was a well thought out policy, very well thought out. And after a 15-year debate between the Anglicists and the Orientalists came the Macaulay's Minute, the Macaulay Memorandum, which was circulated in order to come to a decision about what kind of educational institute should they fund. So they came up with the English Education Act of 1835 after the debate. But we must look at Macaulay's Minute. I'm sure many of us know it. Let's read it again. We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. To that class we may leave it to refine the vernacular dialects of the country, to enrich those dialects with terms of science borrowed from the Western nomenclature, and to render them by degrees fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of the population. So now, after this was, the English Education Act was passed, English struck its roots in the soil of India, missionary schools were set up, and you know what happened. Meanwhile, the funny thing is that when all this was happening in India, look at what was happening in England. England was languishing in illiteracy. A minuscule fraction went to school, and the only book most literate people had read was the Bible. Now I'd like to talk about Dharampal. I think some of you would have heard about him, but by and large most people I speak to haven't heard of Dharampal. We owe a big debt of gratitude to him that he brought so many facts to light that we never knew before. So what did Dharampal find? Dharampal went to London on some other work, and he happened to spend a lot of time in libraries there. And he came across archival material of extreme significance. A series of surveys commissioned by British government in 19th century to assess the level of indigenous education in India. So we have to give it to the British for being very systematic. They're very systematic, so they first want to know what is the level of education in India. So they conducted a series of surveys in Madras Presidency, Bengal Presidency, Punjab, various parts of India. And they also documented it. What did they find? They found that every village in India had a Pathshala. And there were 100,000 Pathshalas in Bihar and Bengal alone. So just imagine, it's mind-boggling. One Pathshala in every village. And what was taught in those Pathshalas? Reading, writing, epics. All of them knew Mahabharata and Ramayana, Bhagavata. Arithmetic was taught, was very compulsory, and literacy was very high. Very few illiterates existed. They knew their language. If they were in Andhra, they knew Telugu. If they were in Tamil Nadu, they knew Tamil. That was taken care of. Teachers were very dedicated. There were superior methods of teaching, and there was high attendance. All this is reported by the people who did the survey. Another interesting thing was and which broke the stereotype that we have. In a large number of schools, Shudras were in majority, while the Brahmins and Vaisyas, with Vaishyas, were in minority. So for example, he found that he's given percentages. In some schools, 70% were Shudras. In some schools, 50% were Shudras. In some schools, there were a number of girls. Like in Kerala, there were many schools which had girls, plenty of girls. So at the basic level, our education system was intact. When the British actually did the survey, at the Pathshala level, our education system was intact. Even though the universities had been destroyed by the Muslim invaders. Now I'm talking about the poverty and famine, how it became rampant during the British rule. Look at this picture of sadness, how they are people who are become skeletons there. We must understand that India was governed for the benefit of Britain. So everything that India produced, food grain, textiles, steel, gold, silver, minerals, everything was for the benefit of Britain. There was no food for teachers and students in Pathshalas. How could education survive? Earlier there was a system where nobody went hungry. They could go and ask for food, they would get food. Now in some places like Tanjavur, mass poverty was created overnight by imposition of 59% taxation of gross produce. The district collector's role was to fleece citizens. So you will read accounts of how they are going, they are mapping India simply because they want to fleece the maximum revenues out of that place. Temples were not spared. They had to part with their donations, and it was a matter of time before they all fell into disrepair, and this continues even today. The British educational policy sounded the death knell for regional languages. So once English took root, it was a matter of time before regional languages became very down market, very uninteresting for the people. Mother tongues were relegated to second languages. That's why Mahatma Gandhi said in 1931 that the British left India more illiterate than it was 100 years ago. Because now it was only if you knew English you were considered educated. So if you knew Tamil, Telugu, they felt like they were illiterate, useless people if they didn't know English. So it was also a destruction of self-confidence and self-esteem. There was a chance for India to decolonize itself when we became independent, but that also did not happen. Even today, India looks at itself through alien eyes, which is very sad. So today, we can say that our past heritage lies buried in regional and Sanskrit literature. So if we really want to know what we were capable of, we need to learn our own languages, our mother tongues, and Sanskrit in order to understand what we were.